This happened to me a few years ago. At that time, I was a student living in a small town. An acquaintance of ours had asked me to babysit their kids in the evening. I agreed. It was a good opportunity to earn a little money and take a break from my studies. That day, the weather was a bit windy. The streets were silent, and heavy clouds moved slowly across the sky. I arrived at their house around dusk. The house was 2 stories high, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. Before leaving, the parents explained the kids' bedtime routines and what they should eat. When they left, a deep silence settled over the house. At first, everything was completely normal. The kids were watching TV, and I made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen. I stood by the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. The sound of the wind made the old wooden walls creak, but I took it as something natural. Around 9:30, I put the kids to bed. I read them a story, turned off the light, and left the door slightly open so they wouldn't be scared. Then I went back downstairs. I settled on the couch and started scrolling through my phone. It was around 10 o'clock when the house phone rang. I froze for a moment. I wasn't expecting any calls. Thinking it might be the parents checking in, I answered the phone. There was no voice on the other end, only the sound of breathing. It felt like someone wanted to say something but was hesitating. I said, "Hello," waited a few seconds. No response. Then the call abruptly ended. I told myself it was probably a wrong number. Maybe it was the parents, and there was some network problem. Still, a strange unease crept over me, because the breathing didn't sound normal. It was heavy and disturbingly close. I went back to the couch, turned on the TV and played a movie to distract myself. In the middle of the movie, about 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time my heart jumped. I walked slowly toward the phone and answered. A calm but very clear voice spoke. "Are you taking good care of the kids?" Cold sweat trickled down my arms. I couldn't speak for a few seconds. I just stood there, silent. Then I pulled myself together and asked, "Who are you?" No answer. The call was suddenly cut off. A strange tension spread through my body. My hands were shaking. Still, I told myself maybe it was just someone playing a prank. At night, everything feels scarier anyway. I tried to calm down and sat back on the couch. But this time, even though I was paying close attention, I couldn't hear anything but the TV. The house was eerily silent. So silent that I forgot there was even a clock on the wall, because I couldn't hear its ticking anymore. It felt like the whole house was holding its breath. After the call ended, the strange silence inside the house grew even heavier. I started feeling very uneasy, like I wasn't alone anymore. My eyes wandered to the corners of the room, to the top of the stairs, to the window. I didn't see anything. But once fear creeps inside you, every shadow and every sound starts to feel suspicious. I placed the phone on the couch and sat down. Without realizing it, my hand kept reaching for the phone. I scrolled through messages, wandered around social media. I was trying to make myself feel normal again. About 10 minutes passed. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound from upstairs. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. I listened carefully. It sounded like someone slowly walking across the wooden floor, the boards creaking under each step. I stood up and looked toward the stairs. It was dark upstairs. Only the weak glow of the nightlights in the kids' rooms was visible. I thought maybe one of the kids had woken up. Maybe they wanted water or moved in their sleep. After a moment of hesitation, I headed for the stairs. When I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped and listened. There was no sound. Very quietly, I walked upstairs. The door to the kids' room was slightly open, and I peeked inside. They were both fast asleep. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The faint light illuminated their peaceful faces, and I could hear their calm breathing. For a moment, I felt relieved. I told myself it was probably just the old house reacting to the wind. I started going back downstairs, but when I was halfway down, I heard a soft creaking sound behind me, coming from upstairs. I froze without turning around. Sweat trickled down my back. I took a deep breath and continued down. I sat back on the couch. My hand instinctively reached for the phone again. This time, I made up my mind. I was going to call the police. I called them and explained the situation. The operator spoke in a very calm voice and said, "Answer the next call. We'll try to trace where it's coming from." Even the way the operator spoke carried a strange seriousness. I could feel that he understood just how frightened I was. I held the phone tightly in my hands and waited. The silence inside the house now felt unbearable. It was as if the air itself had become heavier. From the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move past the window. Just for a second, it looked like a hunched figure. I blinked and looked again. Nothing was there. I felt the urge to scream, but I forced myself to stay silent. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. My hands were shaking as I answered. This time, the voice was clearer and deeper. "Are the kids still sleeping peacefully?" The voice sounded like a whisper, but it felt like it was right next to my ear. My mind went blank. I couldn't say a word. I just held my breath and stayed still. Then the operator called me back. He spoke quickly, slightly out of breath. "Stay very calm. We don't want to scare you, but you need to leave the house right now. The calls are coming from inside." When I heard what the operator said, my heart almost jumped out of my chest. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. I sat there frozen on the couch, holding the phone tightly in my hand. I forced myself to stand up. My legs were trembling on their own. I kept glancing back and forth between the top of the stairs and the front door. I couldn't just leave the kids behind. They were still sleeping. The thought of running away without them never even crossed my mind. I slowly made my way toward the stairs. With every step, the wooden floor creaked under me. It felt like the whole house was resisting me. When I reached the top, the darkness seemed even heavier. Breathing had become harder. I reached the kids' room. I gently pushed the door open a little more. They were still sleeping peacefully. At that moment, I made my decision. I had to wake them up and get out immediately. I leaned down and touched one of the kids on the shoulder. He slowly began to wake up. I called the other one as well. Still half asleep, without really understanding what was happening, they followed me. We moved toward the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. With every step, I felt like something was about to grab me from behind. It felt like the darkness itself was moving. When we reached the ground floor, I hurried toward the door. As I grabbed the doorknob, for a split second, I caught sight of something outside. The flashing lights of a police car. The relief that washed over me was so strong, I nearly collapsed on the floor. I quickly opened the door and got the kids outside. 2 police officers were waiting in the yard. One of them picked up the kids. The other spoke to me. He told me not to be afraid, that the danger was over. Later, the police explained that someone had broken into the house. He had been hiding upstairs in one of the rooms. The phone calls were made from inside the house, using one of the old landline phones. What terrified me even more was that when the police entered, the intruder was already gone. They only found an open window and a phone receiver lying on the floor. After that night, I couldn't feel comfortable staying alone for a long time. Even now, sometimes, I can still hear those breathing sounds in the middle of the night. This incident happened a few years ago. At that time, I had bought a large old house. I wanted to live outside the city, in fresh air. The house was very quiet and isolated. There were no neighbors around, which was a big relief for me. City life was very suffocating. I thought living in nature would be better. One day, after work, I came home. The weather was nice, and there were no problems. I opened the windows and let the house breathe. I went to the kitchen to start preparing dinner. I turned on the TV and comfortably started making my meal. But suddenly, I began to feel that something was different. There was an unusual stillness around. There was no sound coming from the street. Not even the birds were making noise. At that moment, I felt a strange sensation inside me. But at first, I didn't take it too seriously. The house was very quiet, but I didn't think much of it. Then, suddenly, I heard a sound. It was footsteps on the marble floor. But since I was alone in the house, it was very strange. At that moment, I felt as if someone else was in the house with me. The sounds got a little closer, but I saw nothing. I turned my eyes around the room, but there was nothing. It was hard to explain. I could only feel that something was wrong. The fear I felt gradually began to grow stronger. Slowly, I stepped back and moved to the center of the room. My whole body was tense, but I still couldn't understand what was happening. The room was filled with an eerie stillness, but this silence was deeply unsettling. The fear inside me didn't allow me to feel comfortable in even a single corner of the house. I kept looking at every corner, every shadow, as if something was watching me. For a few minutes, nothing happened. But then, slowly, I heard footsteps again. This time, the sound was very close, and it seemed like it was right behind me. My heart twisted, and I froze. I had never experienced anything like this before. But at that moment, I realized that being alone in this house wasn't as safe as I had thought. The footsteps didn't stop. In fact, they got closer. I couldn't stay in place from the fear. I instinctively turned my head, but there was nothing. The whole house was dark, with only the light coming through the window casting a slight glow on the room. I could feel how much was hidden inside the house in that silence. The unease inside me had grown so much that, for a moment, I wanted to run away from the house. But I couldn't leave the children alone. I tried to push that thought away, but even every step I took on the floor seemed to warn me of someone's presence behind me. I felt that at any moment, everything could change. Slowly, filled with fear, I began to move between the rooms. The sound was still there, but I couldn't face anyone. I felt the silence and coldness even more, as if everything in the house was watching me. For a moment, I was overwhelmed with strange sensations, and I felt like I had no strength left. All I wanted was to survive, to protect myself. I moved closer to the window. The wind seemed to have gotten a bit stronger, but I didn't feel anything. For a moment, I thought that seeing any movement would only increase my fear, but I saw nothing. Only a small shadow appeared in the window before my eyes. Then I heard another sound. This time, it wasn't behind me, but it was clear that someone was inside the house. A coldness spread throughout my body. My hand trembled as I held my phone, but I didn't want to do anything. I felt that something was trying to scare me, but I still couldn't understand what it was. And at that moment, the fear I felt became so intense that my entire body froze. It felt like everything was watching me, and my eyes searched for something in every shadow, every window corner, every sound. But I saw nothing. I only felt that terrifying sensation inside me. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone, but the screen seemed to go dark. It felt as if the phone, despite itself, wanted to escape from this fear. A few seconds passed, and I began to grow even more frightened. I felt as if someone was right behind me at every moment. The fear made it hard to breathe, but somehow, I looked at the phone screen and started pressing the numbers. It felt like dozens of thoughts were swirling in my mind all at once, but I couldn't decide on anything. The phone rang. I was afraid to answer it, but I finally picked up. I took a deep breath, and the voice on the other end said, "You are not alone here." For a moment, I couldn't say anything. I just held my breath from fear. My whole body was trembling. At that instant, the phone slipped from my hand and fell to the floor, lying in silence. The whole house seemed to calm down, as if nothing had happened. I could hear nothing but a void in my ears. But, as if in a split second, everything changed again. The silence in the house became even heavier. I didn't understand what had happened for a long time. Slowly, I stood up and began to check every corner. I couldn't find any sign, any trace. Everything seemed to be just as it had been before, but deep inside my heart, a profound unease remained. I picked up the phone and ended the call. But after a while, I realized that this fear would never truly end. From that night on, whenever I was alone, I began to fear the shadows and every sound. Even when I was in a house by myself, I could still hear those sounds in my ears. That night, I realized that everything in the house had changed. Now, when I was alone in the house, I began to doubt everything. The fear I felt at that moment could never be forgotten.